Well, next tonight, it has long been known that Britain is getting larger. In fact, we're one of the heaviest nations in Europe, with 2/3 of UK adults now overweight. We're in a health crisis, and it is costing our health service dearly. New figures show that 3,000 people a day are being admitted to hospital because of obesity. That's double what it was 6 years ago. And those admitted are getting younger. 20 children a day now admitted for the same reason. Things are at their worst in Luton, where one hospital admission in every 20 is linked to obesity. So what's it costing our NHS? An estimated £98 billion a year. The government is accused of being brainwashed by those lobbying for fast food companies, with Rishi Sunak recently delaying plans to ban unhealthy food adverts on TV until 2025. Joining me to discuss more on this, GP and columnist Dr Martin Scurr. Also with Lizzie, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowdon. Gentlemen, thank you. Dr Martin, I'll start with you first, if you don't mind. At a time when the NHS is creaking, needing more funding, £98 billion a year, that's a large amount of money. What does it mean to health providers?
It's terrifying. You know, this is something that didn't need to happen due to the change in our culture over the last 2 or 3 decades, maybe. And it keeps GPs very, very busy dealing with a health epidemic, really, which is as frightening as anything we've ever seen. And the figures you gave us, massive. 25.9% of adults are obese. So their body mass index is above 30. And the health consequences of that are huge. Coronary heart disease, hypertension, fatty liver disease, diseases we never saw when I was first in practice in the 1980s. It's a very, very scary time.
I was about to ask you that. In your career, how have things changed? You talk about a change in culture. Have you really noticed that in the terms of the way people's bodies are now in the UK?
It's massive. You not even in the GP surgery. You only have to walk around the supermarket and see people that are huge. We never used to see that. And it's frightening. I feel so sad for these people. Difficulty walking, you know, knees splayed out, difficulty going upstairs, just difficulty managing. You sit on a tube train, the seats are too narrow. Sit on a bus, the seats are too small for the size of the people that we see. And we've really only seen that the last 20 or 30 years. Do you know, in the 1990s, we began to see abnormal liver function in people, which we'd never seen before. And ultrasound scanning had come in, and we learned that this was fatty infiltration of the liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's called NAFL, totally new syndrome we'd never seen before. And now it's everywhere. And NAFL can lead to NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatosis, inflammation in the liver, which is as bad as the cirrhosis you get from drinking alcohol. People die of it, and it's a pre-cancerous condition. So who would have ever thought that being overweight is a cause of cancer? And that's what the NHS is battling with. It's really frightening, and it's a cultural shift.
Let's bring in.
I'm not sure we can ever put the genie back in the bottle.
Let's bring in Christopher then, about this cultural shift and putting the genie back in the bottle. When you see these stories in the papers, when you come on TV shows, discuss them with us, do you think it's a worthwhile topic to discuss?
It's worth trying to debunk some of the claims. Yeah, I mean, when I saw the Times front page today, I knew it was incorrect. The claim that obesity emissions have doubled in the space of 6 years. How can anyone even believe that? Shouldn't that set alarm bells ringing when you see a rise or a fall of that magnitude in any statistic? You've got to think, well, maybe there's something changed in the methodology there. And that's exactly what's happened here. This is all about secondary diagnoses. Secondary diagnoses are essentially optional, to put it in crude terms. Doctors and nurses don't have to take a record of a secondary diagnosis. It doesn't mean that the person is in hospital because of obesity. It just means that they are obese. It may or may not have some effect on their care while they're in hospital. It may or may not be at least a partial explanation for why they're there, but they're not there. Not all these people are there because of obesity. £98 billion spent treating obesity in the NHS, you just said. That's the majority of the NHS budget. How can anyone believe that? Of course, that's not what it is. People seem to lose their ability to think critically when they're talking about this issue, and claims that politicians would be quite rightly roasted for seem to be able to get through with no questions asked.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, it's an emotional issue, I suppose. There's lots of people invested in trying to change what other people eat. I think the media is always keen on a crisis. The trouble is we're treating everything like a crisis, although it might be quite entertaining and it gets viewers of shows like this wound up in one way or another. It ultimately leads to the loss of liberties, and people are being manipulated through this kind of scaremongering into allowing the government to seize control of the food supply and increasingly dictate what we eat.
Let's come back just briefly to Dr. Martin and ask what you make of that idea that this has been methodologically manipulated.
I think it's about the use of words. People are not admitted to hospital because they're overweight. They're admitted because they've got the consequences of type 2 diabetes, which is itself a consequence of being overweight. So type 2 diabetes sounds quite mild. You don't need injections of insulin, do you? It's just a matter of diet and the right tablets to lower your blood sugar. But those people get arterial disease because their cholesterol races up. They rot their legs, so people have amputations. You lose your eyes. It's the commonest cause of blindness in the Western world, the retinopathy of type 2 diabetes. So it's the escalating consequence of the diabetes that leads to hospital admissions. And there was the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that I mentioned. So you're not in hospital because of obesity. You're in hospital because of the diseases that arise because of the obesity. And I've only mentioned but few, but you've got coronary heart disease, hypertension, and all the other things that are the consequences of being overweight. And so my colleague there speaks well, but you're not in because you're heavy. You're in because of the consequences of being heavy.
Dr. Martin Scurr and Christopher Snowdon, thank you very much.